Boker Tov, everyone. Good morning, and thank you for joining me for Hi There with Rabbi Leah. Good to see you all again, even though I'm just kind of virtually seeing you. I want to start this morning with singing because I love to sing, and because I think that it will bring additional oxygen to our brains, which is always a good thing to have when you're trying to learn. And so we're going to sing this morning appropriately, Modeh ani lefanecha, or if you're a lady, Moda ani lefanecha. And Moda ani lefanecha melech chai v'kayam, shehechazarta bi nishmati bechemla. I give thanks to you, O God, for being able to open my eyes this morning, for waking up, for seeing this gorgeous day. We've had some unseasonably warm weather, and I like it. So I hope that you will join me in singing this. And then we're going to get into a brand new topic today. More on that in a moment. Moda ani lefanecha, melech chai v'kayam, שהחזרת בי נשמתי בחמלה, בחמלה, רבה אמונתך. Rabba emunatecha. Again, Moda ani lefanecha, melech chai v'kayam, שהחזרת בי נשמתי בחמלה, בחמלה, רבה אמונתך, רבה אמונתך. That felt good. Got the air moving, the juices flowing, and so on. You can't see it next to me, but I do have an extra chair over here because suddenly Tootsie will not be without me while I'm recording. So, unless I set up a chair for her with a blanket or a pillow, she will annoy us throughout the entire program this morning. So she is sitting here next to me and just sleeping away. And she is a snorer. So if you hear a little bit of snoring going on, that would be Tootsie. Okay, so what do I want to talk about this morning? I want to talk about a subject that is probably not near and dear to most of your hearts, probably something about which you may know a little bit, but not a lot, something about which probably only the women who are watching today may know something, but definitely not the men, unless you grew up in an Orthodox or a very conservative environment, and that is the mikveh. So before you start groaning and saying, oh no, why do we have to talk about this? If you're not interested, that's fine, but it is, the mikveh is really a very, very interesting part of Jewish tradition. And I want to talk about it not only historically and ritually, but how the mikveh is being used in a very modern and progressive context. And I think that you're going to find that fascinating. At least I do. So, in order to understand the progressive movements and how they approach mikveh, we first have to talk about its historical and its ritual use so that we can understand how some of these other uses have come into being. So I'll start by saying that most of you probably have never been to a mikveh. If you have, it is probably for one of two reasons. Either that you converted to Judaism, and as part of that conversion process, the rabbi with whom you studied required it, or the second reason is that as a woman, you went prior to getting married. And if you were married, if you had a Jewish marriage ceremony. And frankly, it was probably one of the worst experiences of your life, and you never went back again. So, those of you who were raised in Orthodox tradition may have known a grandmother or your mother or a tanta, an aunt who went, but nowadays the mikveh is used almost exclusively by the Orthodox community and others for very specific reasons. And when I say the Orthodox community, I mean the community, the entire community, not just the women. So if you thought that the mikveh was for women only, you would be wrong, which is something that I found out quite a while ago, but certainly not in my youth as a Jewish woman. I found this out much later. So there have been two periods of time, historical periods of time, during which the mikveh was used. Prior to this destruction of the temple in Jerusalem, and of course, after the destruction. And if you've ever seen the remains of what still exists in Jerusalem of the temple, which is the Western Wall, also known as the Kotel, also known as the Wailing Wall, as well as the Southern Wall and the Southern Steps, you will see on that southern side that there are mikvaot, which is the plural, baths for immersion, because people immersed before going into the Temple Mount area. And that was used by the priests before they went in, and by regular old people who were immersing, men and women who were immersing before they went in. And it's really fascinating to see these mikvahs kind of laid out among the steps. And they look pretty much the same as our mikvahs today, but without the bells and whistles and nice tile and so on and so forth. If you've ever been to Masada, you will see a beautiful mikveh there with gorgeous mosaics. So the word mikveh, if we want to talk about the etymology of the word mikveh means a collection of waters. So any collection of waters, a pool of water, could be termed a mikveh. But when we speak about this collection of waters, we know that it is a bath primarily used for ritual immersion in Judaism. So, what kind of ritual immersion could it be? We know of some that we are very familiar with. So, for example, by Jewish women who are immersing for ritual purity after menstruation and childbirth, and before they and their husbands are allowed to resume marital relations. So that is the primary purpose that most of us know about. But also, the mikveh is used by Jewish men to achieve ritual purity after ejaculation. And I know we're talking about adult themes here, and I hope you won't mind. But, we're all adults who are watching this. And when I tape these videos, they're always marked for ages 18 and older. So don't worry that your kids or your grandkids are going to get into them. Okay. It is part of the traditional procedure for conversion to Judaism, and it's very interesting that it is only really within the last maybe 20 years or so, maybe 25 years, that even Reform rabbis are often requiring mikvah as part of the conversion process. And years ago, the early reformers did away with anything that smacked of orthodoxy, and that included mikvah, because they saw this whole notion of ritual purity as being kind of like kashrut and like so many other things that were part of traditional Judaism. And they kind of threw the mikvah water out with the baby, so to speak. So the baby in the bathtub. So it is used for traditional, for conversion to Judaism. And I have gone to the mikvah many, many times with a ger or a girot, a male or a female candidate for conversion. It is also used to immerse newly acquired metal and glass utensils used in serving and eating food and preparing food. So you can bring your new dishes or metal and glass utensils to the mikvah to kosher them. And in fact, if you have utensils that have somehow become treif, unkosher, because they got mixed in the wrong pot, you could take them to the mikvah and immerse them in the mikvah. So the mikvah is used for a variety of purposes, some of which you knew about and some of which you didn't, like using it for dishes and so on. So the last use of the mikvah, which was a new one for me, is to immerse a corpse as part of preparation for burial, for tahara. Now, many of you have heard of tahara, which is the ritual preparation of a body for a Jewish burial. And it involves washing the body, it involves dressing the body in a certain type of shroud clothing, it involves the saying of prayers, and so on and so forth. This is the first I've heard of immersing a corpse in a mikvah as part of the preparation for burial. So that was a new one for me. It's important that you understand that the mikvah is used for ritual purity. It is not used for getting clean. So when a person immerses in a mikvah, they are considered ritually impure before they go in. They're not considered dirty or unsanitary or an untouchable or something like that. But they are considered ritually impure could be for a variety of reasons. And we know that in the Torah, particularly in the book of Leviticus, the book of Vayikra, where we get all the priestly rules and laws, we know that there are so many things that could make an individual impure. The priests were a very black and white type of entity. Something was either pure or impure. There wasn't a little bit impure. There was nothing in between. And the priests knew very clearly what made somebody impure: touching a corpse, having a skin affliction that sent them outside of the camp for a week to heal, whether it was some kind of a metzora, like a leprosy. But this designation of pure and impure is very strict, and the adherents to it know definitely what causes purity and impurity. Most forms of ritual impurity can be purified through immersion in any natural collection of water. So, for example, here in San Diego, we will often do a conversion mikvah in the ocean because that is a natural collection of water. There are some impurities, however, that require this living water, such as springs or underground groundwater wells that come up. And of course, I'm talking about in an Orthodox tradition. Um, Living water, these springs, these wells that come up from underground, have a further advantage, because they can be purified even while they're flowing. It doesn't have to be a still, static body of water like rainwater, for example, that's collected, which has to be stationary to purify. So the mikvah is designed to simplify the requirement. And when I say the mikvah, I'm talking about modern mikvaot are designed in a way that simplify the requirement because they provide a bathing facility that remains in contact with a natural source of water. And I'll talk more about how a mikvah is built in a little bit. In Orthodox Judaism, these regulations are steadfastly adhered to. And so consequently, the mikvah is central to an Orthodox Jewish community and held as a pretty important component in conservative Judaism as well. And the existence of the mikvah is considered so important that a Jewish community is required to construct a mikvah even before building a synagogue, and in fact can go to any extreme in order to pay for building of that mikvah, including selling their Torah scrolls or even selling a synagogue building if necessary to provide the funding for the construction of the mikvah. Now that sounds rather extreme, and it is, but when you realize that so many of the mitzvot cannot be done if somebody is in a ritually impure condition, that without the mikvah to render someone ritually pure, we're in trouble. So let's think about the first commandment of the Torah, which is pru urbu, which is to be fruitful and multiply. How can a man fulfill that very first mitzvah in the Torah, to be fruitful and multiply, is if his wife is ritually impure? He can't. How can one keep kosher if their dishes are not koshered? So without the mikvah, which became the central location of a Jewish community, even more so than the synagogue, because frankly, you can pray anywhere, but the mikvah had to be constructed. So an Orthodox community will build a mikvah first before they do anything else. They will then have a holy society, the Chevra Kadisha, which is the group that performs tahara, the ritual preparation of a body for burial. They will have a Chupat Cholim, which is an organization to take care of the sick. They will have an organization that provides goods and services for people in the community that are not wealthy enough to afford it. And that is called a gamach, which is an abbreviation for the words Gimilut Chasadim, acts of loving kindness. And that is a place where a bride and groom can come to get dishes for their wedding, can get a wedding gown if they need it, and so on and so forth. In fact, a number of years ago, I donated my wedding gown to a gamach in Israel so that a bride who can't afford a wedding gown can have a wedding gown to wear. So these are all the institutions and entities that are set up in a Jewish community before a synagogue is built. It's interesting to see what takes precedence, but the mikvah was all important. All right, so a little bit of history. Before the beginning of the first century of the Common Era, so we're talking about 100 BCE, we don't find any written sources or archaeology that gives us an indication of the existence of specific installations used for ritual cleansing. The mikvahs, as we kind of know them today, appear around the beginning of the first century of the before the Common Era, and from then on, these ancient mikvaot have been found throughout the land of Israel, as well as in other historic Jewish communities throughout the diaspora, so throughout the rest of the Jewish world. And for example, one was very recently found. A 2,000-year-old mikvah was found near Hanaton, which is in northern Israel, and that was in October of 2020. So literally just a few months ago. And of course, all over ancient Israel that you go now, you see these mikvaot. As I mentioned at Masada, I have seen an ancient mikvah in Barcelona that was part of a Roman synagogue. So very often the mikvah is strategically placed near the synagogue. Okay, we're going to talk about what the mikvah itself looks like in a little bit. So here is how a mikvah is built, and then that'll be enough information for today. The traditional rules regarding how the mikvah is constructed come from classical rabbinic Judaism. So in other words, we don't have any discussion in the Torah or in the Bible about how a mikvah is constructed because they didn't construct them in those days. They had them, they were naturally flowing bodies of water. So according to classical rabbinical literature, a mikvah must be connected to a natural spring or a well of naturally occurring water. So it can be supplied by rivers and lakes, which have natural springs as their source. You can also have a cistern that is filled by rainwater. That's also permitted. That can act as a mikvah's water supply as long as the water is never collected in a vessel. So in other words, it has to be moving. You can't have a rainwater barrel and then take that rainwater barrel and fill the mikvah with it. It's got to be a flowing source of water. So snow, ice, and hail are also allowed to act as a supply of water to a mikvah. And that is no matter how they were transferred to the mikvah. So I guess you could go to a mountain, collect a bunch of snow, and transport it, and it's going to be melted probably by the time you get it to wherever it is, and then use that. A river, of course, is going to dry up upon occasion. And if a river dries up, actually there is a Hebrew term for that. It's called a wadi, which is a dried riverbed. And you may have seen that term before, especially if you travel to Israel, W-A-D-I. And if that river dries up and then there's water in it again, it can't be used because it's presumed to be rainwater and not spring water. It's presumed that the spring has dried up. That's why the riverbed is dry. So any water that now accumulates is rainwater, and it's not in a flowing state anymore from a natural source that's springing into it, and so it cannot be used. Oceans and seas have natural springs, and so they can be used. According to the classical regulations, the mikveh has to contain enough water to cover the entire body of an average-sized person. Based on a mikveh with the dimensions of 3 cubits deep, 1 cubit wide, and 1 cubit long, the necessary volume of water was estimated to be 40 seah of water. Okay, so what's a cubit? We hear about cubits, of course, when Noah is building his ark. And a cubit is, they have determined, the length of your arm from your elbow to the tip of your middle finger, which on average is about 18 inches. Now, mine is, of course, smaller because I'm a smaller person, but they're basing this on an average human being. And so 3 cubits deep, 1 cubit wide, and 1 cubit long. And then they determined, based on that size, how much volume of water, and it was 40 seah of water. The exact volume referred to by a seah, that's hotly debated, but classical literature specifically specifies only that it is enough to fit 144 eggs. 144 eggs is 12 dozen eggs, right? That does not seem like a very big space because that would be a pretty tight fit. So that is the amount of water required, flowing water required. You can have more than that. I mean, clearly a modern day mikveh is not just 3 cubits deep, because that would only be, what is 3 times 18 is 54 inches. 54 inches is not, well, I guess it's pretty deep, right? Yes, I have to stand on my tiptoes when I go to a mikveh. And most Orthodox Jews use the stringent ruling of Avraham Yeshaya Karelitz, according to which 1 seah is 14.3 liters, and therefore a mikveh must contain approximately 575 liters. That's quite a bit of water. So the volume of water can later be topped up with any water source, but if there were less than 40 seahs of water in the mikveh, then you have to add at least 3 or more pints of water that was intentionally collected in any vessel or transferred by a human. And, you don't want to render the mikveh not kosher for use. So in other words, you can't get the water out of your tap and fill the mikveh. It has to be transported specifically for use in the mikveh. That's enough for today. We're going to continue this on Wednesday, tomorrow, and you'll be able to tune in at either 10:30 or 2:30 for part 2. And I promise, after we get through all this background information, we're going to get to the modern uses for the mikveh, which I think you'll find very interesting. But I think until we get this background information kind of out of the way, you have to understand it in order to get to the new stuff. So I'm going to say lahitraot for now. Thank you for joining me for Chai there. You'll be able to watch this again this afternoon if you want to at 2 o'clock. And I'll see you tomorrow again. Take care. Bye-bye.